What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Just wanted to remind you guys that if you are enjoying these daily uploads, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you end up enjoying the video. It really helps the video to do well and ensure I can keep making these daily videos for as long as possible. If we could get to 1,000 likes, that would be a really good milestone. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories while you're listening to this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as my favorite part of doing these videos is hearing your guys' thoughts on the stories therein. Without further ado, I will let you guys enjoy the next 1 hour of true scary stories. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys again at the end of the video. When I was in my mid-20s, I had a job I enjoyed quite a bit. It honestly paid really decently too. Basically, without getting into too many details, I would drive all over the state delivering medications for people that otherwise couldn't pick them up from the pharmacy for one reason or another. The work aspect of the job was pretty straightforward, if not a little bit boring. It was the driving part of the job that I really loved. I'm someone who absolutely adores podcasts of all types. Because my day was spent mostly driving, I would just devour hours of content. Some may find that boring, but for me it was a dream job really. One day I had to make a delivery that was in the middle of nowhere, and I mean quite literally. There was nothing nearby. I passed by a small handful of farms, but that was about it. The closest town was 30 minutes away at least. I eventually pulled up to this little shack that was barely even eligible to be considered a home. I would say it was honestly sad, but the guy who owned it didn't seem to care too much. I dropped off his medication and started my long journey back to civilization. The next drop was over an hour away from where I was, so I knew I was going to get a nice chunk of podcasting in. The first hiccup came when I was leaving that man's home. I had no service at all, so I couldn't input the new address into my GPS system. Worst of all, I couldn't load any podcasts either. I'd looked at the route that morning before I started my trip, so I had a general idea of where to go. I just wasn't super confident in that. I started in the direction I thought was the correct way, and simply hoped for the best. While driving, I enjoyed the sunshine cooking me through the windshield. Every few minutes, I would check my phone to see if my service had come back, but it was still no use. Then came hiccup number 2. I was driving down a long, empty stretch of nothing. I must have hit something on the road, because I suddenly lost control for a brief second and got a flat tire. That was just perfect. I got out to change the tire, and of course hiccup number 3 soon revealed itself. There was no spare tire in the trunk. At this point, I was feeling like crap. I had no idea where I was, I had no service on my phone, and now I had a flat tire on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. The only silver lining here was that it was beautiful outside. Something about the thought of being stranded on the side of the road in the middle of the night seemed scary, but it seemed peaceful, being stranded on a beautiful day. I sat down on the side of the road for a while and tried to figure out what exactly I was going to do. I didn't know if I should walk until I saw a farm or a town or what. The problem was, if I started walking, I would have to leave the vehicle, and obviously there was a lot of sensitive material in that car. I thought about maybe just sitting there until someone drove by. Eventually, I would be able to go get help, right? But the more I thought about it, the more unlikely that seemed. I'd only seen 2 cars in total since I'd entered this area. I wrestled with what to do for a long while, when a small miracle occurred. Or at least, at the moment, I considered it a miracle. A car just so happened to drive by. When he saw me stranded on the side of the road, he pulled over. A bigger man got out of the car and started making his way over to my vehicle. In a soft but deep voice, the man called out to me, "Hey there, looks like you could use a hand." I explained the situation about not having a spare or any cell phone service. The man just chuckled a bit and said, "Yeah, phones don't really work around here that well. If you want, I can give you a lift to my place. You can call someone from there. It's only a few more minutes up the road." Now, ordinarily, I would never agree to do something like that, but at this point, I was honestly very desperate. I locked up my car tight and decided to leave everything in there, figuring it would be safe for at least a little while I was gone. I agreed to the proposition and got into this random kind gentleman's car. The first thing I noticed was this horrific smell. It smelled like the man hadn't showered in 50 years. The car itself was also filthy. Trash and cans of food lined the floor of the car. As the man started driving, I looked down and noticed some of the cans at my feet were beer cans. That didn't make me feel much safer. I just kept telling myself the man was helping me, and I needed to be nice to him. A few minutes later, we pulled up to a barn that looked like it was about to fall apart. It had a silo attached as well. At least, that's what I think they're called. Those big cylinder things barns sometimes have. The silo had a big gigantic hole in it, and the barn itself was falling over. The roof looked partially caved in. The most glaring thing I noticed was that there was no farmhouse at all, just this old barn. Before I could say anything, the man interrupted my thoughts. "Well, it's just inside there, son. Go ahead and make your call, and I'll take you back." I'm not sure exactly what was running through my skull in that moment to convince me this barn had a phone. Maybe it was seeing that rundown shack at my last stop, or maybe I was just an idiot. Either way, I slowly started to make my way over. When I had walked away from the man's car, I turned around. He looked like he was sneaking out of it. His eyes were oddly fixated on me. When he knew I'd seen him sneaking, he had this deer-in-the-headlights look and stopped moving. He kept on uttering, "It's just inside the barn, just over there on the left, son." I slowly started to turn my head back. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the man reaching into his glove box. I looked forward to the barn. I was close enough now to see the inside was completely empty, completely abandoned. My instincts kicked in. I realized something very bad may be about to happen. Without thinking, I took off running. As I did so, I looked behind me. The man was inches from where I'd been standing, in the midst of swinging a large blunt object in his hand. I think some sort of pipe. I couldn't be sure, though. I kept running, trying to keep my distance. My heart was about to explode. Thankfully, it was sunny enough I could actually see where I was going. To my surprise, I ran far enough that I got service on my cell phone, and I was able to call the police. I tried to explain to them where I was, and tried to give them a brief description of the man and his car. I didn't think it was a good idea, but the police told me to try and carefully make my way back to my vehicle. I did so reluctantly, and was able to get there. The police were already there when I arrived, and the man was nowhere to be seen. I gave my statement and told them exactly where he had taken me. Unfortunately, the man's car and description didn't match any of the folks that lived in the nearby areas. They seemed to be pretty familiar with everyone around there. We got my car towed, and the day ended at that moment. As far as I know, the police never found the man. Honestly, it seemed like they didn't care too much when I was giving my statement. Thankfully, I'm sitting here today, still able to tell my story. But if I didn't run when I decided to, I would have been in a very different situation. Every time I drive by a barn now, I'm reminded of that horrible afternoon. It just goes to show that sometimes monsters don't always hide in the shadows of the night. They can lurk even on the brightest of sunny days. I live by myself in a typical-sized home in the suburbs. This took place last year, when I was finally deciding to clean out my basement a bit. Now, the basement of my house is not finished, so the floors are concrete, and there's lots of random pipes and stuff. There's never really much purpose for me to go down there, so since I moved in about 5 years ago, it's really just been used for storage. I wanted to maybe finish up the basement, or at least make the space useful somehow. I decided to go through the things down there and organize them a bit. I hadn't been in the basement in about a month at least. One day, I went down there and started cleaning. There was quite a bit of things down there, mostly large boxes with various items in them that I didn't use much. I started with the area closer to the stairs and went through the boxes one at a time. I was getting rid of a lot of things, either throwing them away or donating them. Other things I was going to be storing in a much more organized way. Probably about an hour into cleaning, I was there in the basement when I thought I heard a strange noise. I wasn't exactly sure what it was at first. I thought maybe it was a mouse or something, which made me unhappy to think about. When I heard it, I remember I stopped and looked all around. I didn't see anything down there with me though. The noise stopped almost right away too, so I just went back to work. I didn't hear any more noises for a while. About 10 minutes later though, I did see something. It was mostly dark in the basement, because the only lighting was a couple of dim light bulbs. You couldn't see very well. I thought I could see somebody down there with me. There were some boxes by the water heater on the other side. I was absolutely sure I had seen a man crouched down and looking at me. I could only see his head and part of his shoulder. It was a really freaky sight to see. When I noticed this, I did not try to stare at the man or anything. In fact, I tried to pretend like I hadn't even noticed him. At first, I kept cleaning and organizing the boxes as I had been, even though my heart was now racing a mile a minute. I didn't want this guy, whoever he was, to know that I'd discovered him. I wanted badly to just get up and run upstairs, but I needed to remain calm in this situation. I paid close attention, wondering if the guy was going to make a move at all. I could see out of the corner of my eye that he was remaining perfectly still. For the next minute or two, I continued what I was doing. Then I decided to go upstairs. I tried to make it look as natural as possible. I picked up a random box and started to walk up the stairs with it. As I was going up, I just wanted to break into a run, but I knew I had to be calm and go at normal speed. When I had almost made it to the top of the stairs, though, I could hear the man moving behind me. I didn't bother to look back. I didn't want to. Within seconds, I could tell the guy was now charging for the stairs, probably to go up after me. At that point, I went a lot faster. I made it to the top and closed the basement door, then ran as fast as I could. I didn't know where to go or what to do. I ran into the bathroom and locked myself inside. It was the only room in the entire house that had a locking door at the time. Not even my bedroom door had one. After I got inside, I heard footsteps upstairs. Whoever this man was, he had followed me up. I called the police on my cell phone while in the bathroom. I was very careful not to make any noise. I didn't want to give away my location. The man walked through the living room area and seemed to be getting closer to me. Eventually, he got to the hallway where I was. At this point, I hung up the phone with the police. I was too scared to make any noise. Looking back, that was quite dumb, but I was really panicking. The guy reached the bathroom door and then began trying to open it. He discovered it was locked. and turned and walked away. He went back toward the living room and seemed to go into the kitchen. After that, I didn't really hear much else. Finally, I heard the back door to the house open and close as well, possibly him leaving. I still didn't leave my hiding place though. I stayed in the bathroom for 10 minutes until the police finally arrived. I let them into my home, and they looked all through my house and the basement as well. The man had in fact left through the back door. They also searched the outside, but he was long gone. We looked in the basement, and I wasn't aware of anything being messed up down there. I was really creeped out by the whole thing. I still am, really. I have no idea how the guy even got inside my house. That remains a mystery to me, as well as what exactly he wanted. For some background to this story, I'm a woman, and at the time this took place, I lived in a rented house. The neighborhood was a typical one that was pretty busy. There were many houses spread throughout it. I lived alone and was going to be moving to a new home. I was still going to be renting, but just in a little bit better of a location. In a nicer house, you know? This particular house that I was moving out of, I had lived in for exactly 2 years. It was kind of small, but it was enough space for me. I didn't own that much stuff yet or anything, though. About a week before it was time to head out, I decided to clean up the place and pack up some things. For several days, I organized, cleaned, and packed up many items in boxes. I got to the point where the only things I still had out were things I was currently using. I couldn't move my big furniture just yet either. Just a few days before moving, I decided to pack some boxes into my car. I was going to bring them down to my parents' house, who were helping me move. I remember that while I was bringing one of the boxes out to my car, I saw one of my neighbors outside. I wouldn't say I was really friends with any of my neighbors from living there for a couple of years. I talked to a few, but I never hung out with anybody. Most of the people I lived by, I could recognize their faces though. The man I saw lived across the street, one house over from me. He had glasses and was somewhat short and thin. I remember after I put the box in my car, he asked me if I was moving out. I told him yes, and he asked me where. I gave him the name of the city, which was about 30 minutes away. We then had a very brief conversation. He asked me why I was moving and all that sorts of stuff. Overall, it was pretty normal. I went back inside to continue. After I'd packed my car with several boxes, I wanted to clean some more. On this night in particular, I actually ended up staying really late cleaning. I got so focused and didn't expect to do that. There was a lot to be done though. I remembered that I was still cleaning at nearly midnight. I was planning to be done soon. I was in the living room when I was absolutely certain that I heard the sound of my back door rattling. It sounded just like somebody trying to open it, but it was locked. Instantly, I got a bad feeling. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I stopped and listened in, but everything was quiet now. I got up and walked over to the back end of my home. The small dining room had a back door, but I couldn't see anything out there. I turned on the back light to get more visibility, but still I couldn't see any signs of anyone, at least not anymore. I went to the side of the house to double check through a window there, but I still didn't see any signs of anyone. After that, I moved back to the living room. Just to be safe, I went to look out a window in the front too. There and then, I saw my neighbor, the one I had just talked to earlier. He was walking through my front yard. He didn't seem to have noticed me looking at him. He passed by the area I was looking out of and went out of my sight. I rushed over to the bathroom and looked out another window. I saw him walk right up to my bedroom window, and he appeared to be trying to peek inside. I was so creeped out by this that I decided to call the police. I went into the living room away from all the windows. I didn't want him to see me. I told them that my neighbor was trying to snoop around my yard and even tried to enter the back door. I didn't really know this guy at all, but I had never expected him to try and break in. I wasn't sure what he was capable of now. The 911 operator told me the police were on their way. Then I just had to sit there and wait. Things were pretty quiet. I honestly couldn't even tell if the guy was still out there or not. I didn't dare to check either. I was too scared from what I had seen earlier. I just waited there and didn't really hear much of anything. The police arrived sooner than I expected. I remember hearing my doorbell ring. Honestly, it kind of scared me at first. I looked out the window and saw a police officer. I answered the door and talked to them about what happened. They said they would check around the house now. I figured the neighbor would already be gone, having fled to his place. But to my surprise, he was still there. The police found him hiding in a bush right by a back window. When they questioned him, he tried to flee, but he didn't exactly get very far. After I moved away, I didn't hear anything more about the guy. He was really a creep. I'm so glad I moved away when I did. Car trouble is the worst. With all the other things we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, having your vehicle break down while you're already late to work or heading to a first date or what have you can sometimes feel like the final straw. For this and a few other reasons, I've transitioned from buying cars to just leasing. I love the low maintenance and reliability of swapping out vehicles every few years. The story I'm about to tell you took place 4 years ago. I brought in my SUV for a routine maintenance. They said there was a recall that needed to be handled, and I said that was fine. Recalls don't cost any additional money after all. After waiting for a few hours for all the work to be done, I started to head home to continue the rest of the day. Once I hit the highway though, my check engine light came on, and the car refused to go above 40 miles per hour. I turned around and brought it right back to the shop. They said that whatever they'd used under the hood to fasten the recall could be detached, and they would fix it right away. I was pretty annoyed, but I was glad it at least seemed like an easy fix. Fast forward to 4 days later though, the exact same thing happened. The check engine light came on and the car refused to accelerate beyond 30 miles per hour this time. I called the shop and let them know I would be bringing it in immediately. They kinda tried to push back and said I needed to make an appointment. I voiced my frustration and let them know how the car had been working perfectly fine until they did whatever they needed to do with this so-called recall. When I brought my car in this time, I was met with someone named Jerry, tall bearded guy, missing a fair few teeth. He said he was sorry for the inconvenience and that I just needed to fill out a little bit of paperwork so they could fix it again. It asked for my address, phone number, email, and I'm sure a few other things that I raced through to finish. After about 45 minutes, Jerry came back out and said that he'd personally taken care of it. I should be all set to go now. He gave me a wide smile. I said thanks and headed to my car, where the keys were sitting right on the seat. As I got in the car and started to leave, I could see Jerry flagging me down. I rolled down my window. "I just want to make sure there's nothing else I can do for you. Anything at all?" I paused for a minute and said, "Nope, think I'm all set." I rolled up my window, hoping no further incidents would occur. Fast forward about a week or so, I was still worried every time I drove my car that the same issue was going to happen again. It was a long week at work. I was excited to get some food, sit on the couch, and do nothing for the night. About halfway into a movie I was watching, I suddenly got a call from an unknown number. I answered it and no one said anything on the other side. Annoyed, I kept asking who the person was, but there was no response at all. I could hear this very faint sound, though. It sounded like someone whispering from very far away. I hung up and went back to my movie. About 5 minutes later, I got a call from the same number. I decided to answer again. This time, still no answer, but I could hear breathing much more clearly. "Excuse me, can I help you?" Still no answer. I just hung up and blocked that number on my phone. Eventually, I dozed off on the couch. I woke up to what I thought was lightning, or maybe the TV getting really bright. There was this big flash of light. My TV was off, though. As I tried to gather my bearings, I noticed this flashing of light seemed to be coming from my window. I jolted my head over and experienced one of the most terrifying things in my life. I could see there was a man running away from the side of my house, heading to a car parked on the side of the road. It was difficult to tell, but once my eyes adjusted to the darkness, it was very clear. I ran to my front door to see if I could get a better look at the person, or maybe even a license plate number or something. All I saw was there was a red rust bucket with a bunch of Sunoco gas stickers on the back. I called the police and reported the incident. I knew there wasn't much they could do, but the important thing was to get it filed, just to be safe. Hopefully, they could also get some more patrol cars surveying this area. The following week, on my way to work, the same car issue happened for a third time. This time, I was really irate. I called and was embarrassingly not very pleasant on the phone. I said I was coming in as soon as I could, and I expected the fix to be permanent this time, or they would be replacing my leased SUV with a new one. I went in and spoke to the manager, voicing how upset I was. I expected a fix or I'd be asking for a new vehicle that wasn't having so many issues. They assured me they would fasten it in such a way that it would be more likely that the hood would fly off than this ever being an issue again. After waiting about half an hour, the manager came out again and apologized. He said they would be waiving any costs for the service. As I was leaving, though, I stopped dead in my tracks. I saw that same red car with all those same stickers on the bumper. I didn't know what to do. I literally just stood there, staring. That was until I saw someone walk toward that vehicle. It was that guy, Jerry, the toothless wonder. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't know if it was Jerry's car or a car the shop was working on. I decided to still call the police and let them know. I was very honest. I said that I'd seen the car and I saw someone get in it, but it was also an auto shop, so I didn't really have much more information. I figured it was their job to do the digging and connect the dots. I never did get closure from all that, though. The police never followed back up with me. Luckily, I didn't have any other incidents of phone calls or people showing up to my house. I have a whole new vehicle now, which I love, and I make sure that any oil change or inspection or anything is now done at a completely different body shop. Back when I was in high school, we took a field trip to a museum in the city. I was a freshman at the time. I lived just outside the city, and our school was close by. It wasn't that far of a field trip, but it was still really exciting. Any time we could get out of our normal class routine was great for me. It was an art museum, and I know that we went there for the art class I was in. We left school shortly after it started and took a bus into the city. We then got dropped off in front of the art museum. When we went inside, we got a brief tour from a tour guide, and were then allowed to walk around the museum freely. I was still kind of new to the school at this time, and had transferred at the start of the year. Most of the kids were fairly nice. I was kinda walking around the museum by myself, though. I wasn't really keen on hanging out with anyone specifically that day. In particular, I remember that about an hour into the field trip, I was in one of the rooms in the museum where there were not that many other people around. The room was mostly dark as well. I was just kinda looking around at some paintings when suddenly I felt a tap on my shoulder. I looked over and saw there was a man standing there. He looked to be in his mid-30s or 40s. I didn't know who he was. After getting my attention, he said hello to me. I was confused as to why this guy was talking to me. He clearly didn't work at the museum, and he wasn't a part of my class either. The guy asked for me by my name, and then asked what I was doing here. I remember him saying something like, "Did you skip school today?" I told him no, I was literally here on a field trip. He looked around and saw a few other people in my class around. Then he started asking me more questions about myself. I was kind of creeped out by the guy. I tried to end the conversation multiple times, but he just kept on hounding me. Finally, I said that I had to go, and I walked away pretty quickly. He didn't follow me or anything, so I thought I had finally gotten rid of him. Sometime later, though, when I was in a completely different spot, he approached me out of nowhere again. It was basically the exact same as the time before. He just appeared and called out to me, then tried to talk to me some more. I wanted to walk away from him, but he kept on bombarding me with questions. Finally, I said I had to go once more, and walked away. This time, though, he started to follow me. He was walking after me until I made it to the area near my teacher. Then he stayed a good distance away, still clearly staring at me. For the rest of the field trip, I was sure to stay right next to the teacher. The guy didn't come up and try to harass me again for the rest of the time. Shortly before leaving, though, I did notice him again. He was standing 50 feet away, just staring at me. It was so creepy that I had to look away. I was glad when we were finally leaving the museum. After we left, we got back to the school and finished the school day. I later went home that night and went on Instagram. I saw I had a brand new follower. I looked at it, and it was the exact same guy from the museum. He clearly wasn't using his actual name, but the picture was certainly of him. He sent me a direct message saying hello. I didn't waste any time. I blocked his account immediately and made my account private. What really creeps me out is that I never told the man my last name or my first name. I have no idea how he knew it or how he found my Instagram. Luckily, I never saw or heard from him again. I started taking evening walks around campus in my final year of college. It wasn't long before I began noticing that it really helped me keep my weight down and to clear my head after a long day of work. After graduation, I kept up the practice and continued doing so to this day. Well, many of those around me had become diabetic and hypertensive, causing them to become dependent on multiple medications. I have none of those problems. In fact, my blood pressure is consistently within the normal range, just as my weight and blood sugar are. At the present, I'm the only member of my family able to make such a claim. Actually, as I approach my 43rd birthday, I see no reason to ever stop these walks. For anyone reading this interested in getting healthier, I recommend walking over jogging every time. You get all the benefits without the wear and tear on your body, such as knee problems coming to mind specifically. But with that health tangent aside, like everything in life, there will always be a few downsides to any activity you do. Most of those will come from the outside world, and things you just can't really control. The story I am about to tell you today involves one such downside. The setting was a nice, cool summer evening. I had just completed a wonderful dinner with my family and set out for my usual 4-mile trek around my neighborhood. I had made this walk 1,000 times before and never encountered anything worse than a dog who'd escaped from its owner. In those cases, it only really took a shoo or a wave with my walking stick to drive them away. These walks were one of the rare times of my life I got to be by myself. I'd use them to plan out my future and enjoy the beautiful music of nature going on all around me. For this reason, I generally always walked alone. I never stopped anyone from coming along if they wanted to, but I think my friends and family realized I preferred the solitude. On this night, the sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon. I was coming up to the midway point where I'd turn around and head for home. My street came to a dead end, exactly 2 miles away from my house. At that dead end, there was a big oak tree that I would walk around. I have no real particular reason to do it, just sort of became a habit after a while. Anyway, I made my turn around the tree and was starting to head back when a man's voice suddenly boomed from behind me. "Good evening, neighbor." I almost jumped out of my skin when I heard it. I looked over my shoulder and saw a man jogging up to me out of nowhere. I was so annoyed I actually barked a curse at him. He just appeared. There was a bunch of trees off to the left, but I hadn't seen or heard anyone over there when I passed by. Something about this just didn't seem right to me. Though it was getting dark, from what I could tell, I had never seen this man before. I had no interest in making friends at that moment, especially with a random guy popping up from behind me. It also sort of had me in a bad mood. I'm not usually a rude person, but something about this guy was really bothering me. It went beyond his sneaky arrival. I attempted to jog away and lose him, but he actually caught up to me. I was sure I didn't know this guy. It was unseasonably cold for this time of year, and his attempts at small talk were really grating on me. I could feel a scowl on my face. At that moment, I just wanted to get home. I fought off the urge to tell him to just fuck off. I didn't want to be too rude. Despite being clueless, he hadn't technically done anything wrong yet. He followed me for another mile or so together before my house showed up on the horizon. This entire time, he'd continued rambling on about nothing important. I hadn't said anything back at all. The relief I felt seeing my house in the distance was quickly replaced by a feeling of dread. I wasn't sure if I wanted this man to know where I lived. Instead of turning onto my street, I kept walking. I had no plan of how I was going to shake this guy, but I figured I'd come up with one as I carried on. We carried on for about 20 yards or so before he said something that made my blood really run cold. "Hey, isn't that your street we just passed by?" This sick feeling washed over me. I felt myself breaking out into a cold sweat. I took another step, and everything just kind of went silent. I could hear my heart pounding inside my head. I finally blew up on the man in a way I never had before on anyone. "Who the hell are you? I've never met you before in my entire life, so how did you know my name? I didn't tell it to you." A smug smile spread across his face. It was beyond spine-chilling. "Well, looks like you got me." He was already a rather imposing man, but that smile made him almost monstrous. There was an air of menace around him. I grew more nervous the longer I stood there. Despite the terror I felt, though, my ego prodded me to assert myself here. "I don't know who the hell you think you are or why you decided to bother me, but I can promise you if you ever bother me again, I'll shove my foot so far up your ass, you'll need a surgeon to remove it." It was laughable and an empty threat. I'm an average-sized man, and he could have easily beat me down if he wanted to. By this point, though, I was so scared and angry that I was shaking uncontrollably. I'm sure that he could see it as well. It probably went a long way to assuring him he had the upper hand. Even after all my threats and yelling, that smug grin of his never faded. There was a long, uncomfortable silence before the man finally spoke again. "Well, have a nice night now, Nick." I was at a loss as to how to react. I turned and began walking toward home. Every few yards or so, I'd looked over my shoulder to ensure he wasn't following me. Each time, I expected him to pop up right behind me and strangle me to death with his massive hands. I kept this up until I got inside my house. Now that I was quote-unquote safe, the fear overwhelmed me so much I had to run to the bathroom. I legitimately vomited. I'd never done that before. I kinda stared at myself in the reflection of the mirror, wondering why I'd reacted so negatively to this guy I'd never seen before. Never in my life have I had an experience like that, nor can I fully explain what happened. All I know is that every cell in my body told me I needed to get away from this guy. His very presence just felt wrong. That made me hate him. Had he not acted so strange when I confronted him, I may still be questioning my behavior even now. I know I'm not explaining it the best, and most of you hearing this probably think I'm just crazy, but I can only describe how I felt in that moment. I briefly thought about calling the police, but I had no idea what I would even say if I did so. Making small talk with a neighbor is hardly a crime, and if anyone acted suspiciously, it was me threatening to assault this stranger. I chose to keep my mouth shut and say nothing. That included to my wife. There was no way she'd even understand. I wouldn't really blame her. After that incident, I began carrying my handgun with me in the evenings and changed the route I took as well. Fortunately, I never had another experience like that again. I would see that man one more time, though. It had been 5 or 6 months since he and I had spoken. I was doing a good job putting the incident behind me. One afternoon, my wife and I were unloading some groceries from the car when a silver 4-door sedan slowly drove by. I waved at him and had barely lowered my hand when I realized it was that very same stranger. All those awful feelings came flooding back, and his horrible smile was burned into my mind. I'm not sure exactly how long I was standing there before my wife's voice pulled me back down to earth. She asked me if I was okay. I was as white as a sheet. Rather than dredge up the whole story and risk looking like an insane person, I told her I was just dehydrated. We went back to unloading the car. 5 years had gone by since then, and I haven't seen the guy since. Though I've had all the time to think about it, I still have no idea why he and I crossed paths that night. He obviously sought me out, but that's all I can be certain of. I'd had some minor disagreements with a few neighbors, but nothing I could think of that justified hiring someone to intimidate or even stalk me. He didn't attempt to threaten me directly like you'd think a person like that would, unless he shows up again or someone brings it up. I could only conclude he chose me at random to try and intimidate. Now that I've finally told people about what happened, I intend to make this the last time I ever talk about it. Hopefully sharing it will allow me to let it go once and for all, and it can be forgotten about forever. I didn't realize how messed up this story was until just recently, when I told my girlfriend and all her friends what happened. I guess I'm sort of oblivious to certain things, and horrible at picking up signals. My girlfriend was flirting with me for weeks on end, and I had no idea. So yeah, not the best at overthinking things. Years ago now, when I was 15 or 16 maybe, don't remember the exact age, I attended a Christian summer camp. It wasn't like in-your-face religion or anything like that. It just blasted the Christian name to get people to come to it in the first place. In this part of the country, you're either Christian or you're nothing. My parents also thought it would be a good idea to send me to that camp as well. They thought it would help me socialize and make some new friends. I was pretty awkward back then. Well, they were half right. I met Petey on the first day of camp. He was wearing a Captain America shirt, and I was wearing a Captain America hat. We both laughed about it and instantly bonded. Petey was just like me, really. Socially awkward, dry sense of humor, a gigantic comic book nerd. We'd literally spend hours talking about comics and what we would love to see in movies someday. This was long before the MCU was a thing. I believe Iron Man had just come out before the camp started. This love of comics was what ultimately separated Petey and me from the rest of the camp. Everyone would break off into huge groups and do all sorts of activities, and we'd just stay back and hang out. We both hated the water, so for any swimming activity, we'd just sit that out and talk about things. One day, Petey brought me a bunch of notebook paper and showed me his skill set drawing. The guy was a freak when it came to drawing. He told me to write some of the ideas for my superhero stories, and he would illustrate them. I loved that idea. It got to the point where I didn't even realize I was at camp anymore. I was sort of blind to everything else in the world except for my new buddy here. It seemed like he felt the exact same, too. We would stay up until the early hours of the morning, writing and illustrating our very own comics. One night, one of the counselors decided to do a night walk and saw us still awake with our flashlights, drawing and writing. He didn't get too mad because we weren't doing anything bad, but he still made us put it away and go to bed. We were annoyed, but neither of us was a rule breaker really, so we just did what we were told. The next night, we stayed up and did our thing again. We talked about making sure we were a little bit more vigilant if we heard something to make sure we ducked down right away so we wouldn't get in trouble this time. That night, at some point, we heard someone outside. We put our flashlights out and jumped into our beds. We could hear the person walking outside our unit. And they continued until they were in front of the building. Something about this person just didn't feel right. The walking was too slow, as if maybe they were trying to be sneaky. Maybe to catch someone breaking the rules, but that didn't make sense. Petey and I slept on the far side of the room, so the door was about 20 feet away. At some point, we began to hear the doorknob beginning to shake. For some reason, though, nobody was coming in. Petey and I both made eye contact, and he mouthed to me, "What in the world is going on?" I shook my head because I didn't know. Petey got up and started walking toward the door. He whispered to whoever was out there, "Hey, who is it?" Nobody answered right away. He looked back at me and shrugged when a whisper came from the other side. "It's me, John. Open the door real quick." We were both confused. There was only one John we knew at camp, and he was sleeping in our unit. Petey whispered back, "Sorry, the only John we know is sleeping right here." The voice paused again and didn't answer. Then the whole door started to shake vigorously. Whoever this was trying very hard to get into the unit. Finally, he said something again. "Just open the door, bud. I'm just trying to make sure everyone's okay in there." Petey made the wise decision to say no, and that if he really needed to ask the counselors to give him the key. Petey started walking back to bed. Whoever this was started trying to open the door again. We both stayed for a few seconds. Then we started to hear a loud thudding from whoever was outside. They were throwing their whole body against the door. They only tried a few times before they ultimately stopped. We both got into our beds and just stayed quiet. We didn't have any clue what that was about. After several minutes of silence, we heard the doorknob turn one last time. Then it stopped altogether. We heard the footsteps creep by the outside of the unit, and then they were gone. The next day, I saw a bunch of counselors talking, and they looked frightened about something. We didn't say anything. We figured it was someone playing a prank or something, and we didn't want to get in trouble. The rest of the camp continued, and Petey and I noticed the counselors were now monitoring all night long. It seemed like one was awake at all hours of the night. On the last day, we finally told them what happened that night. The counselor turned white as a ghost. He just said, it was probably just a guy playing a joke. Nothing to worry about." He then immediately ran off and started talking to the other counselors. We went home, and honestly, I didn't really think about that incident too much. Not until the story came up recently, when we were all hanging out. I'm still incredibly close with Petey, and even called him that night I told my girlfriend. He corroborated the entire story. She thinks whoever this John guy was, he clearly had bad intentions. Maybe he did. His attitude and everything about him just seemed completely off. When I think back on it now and about how everybody acted after that night, it makes sense it was someone with ill intention. What do you guys think, though? Did this guy have bad intentions, or was it a camper doing a joke that might have gone too far? This is something that happened when I was a kid, about 13 years old or so. I lived with my parents and 2 older siblings, both sisters. I remember that my father got a new job, and we had to move an hour away or so. For me, it was really exciting, but also kind of sad to leave our old neighborhood, especially at that age. Our new house I thought was pretty nice. It was in a neighborhood with a lot of other houses, but we had a decent-sized front and backyard. We weren't rich, but it had 2 floors and a basement. All 4 bedrooms were upstairs, and the main floor had a kitchen, dining room, living room, and family room. There were also a couple bathrooms and closets as well. We moved in one day with the help of a moving company, and then spent the next couple of days unpacking boxes and stuff. By the following week, we were all moved in. It was summertime, so luckily I didn't have school. One night during that same week, I stayed up late playing video games. This is something I did a lot during that time. Everybody else had gone up to bed, and I was by myself on the main floor. I was in the living room. I don't really remember exactly what time it was, but it was probably sometime after midnight. As I was sitting on the floor playing some video games and looking at the TV screen, I thought I saw something behind it. We had a window which faced the side of our house behind this particular TV. I thought I saw someone walking past outside, right by the window. I couldn't tell who it was at all, but it really took me by surprise. At first, I was wondering if I was just seeing things. I wondered if maybe it was the neighbors on that side, but I didn't feel like it would be. I had a bad feeling about this. It seemed as though whoever it was had headed into our backyard. I decided to get up and go look out one of the back windows. I carefully went toward the kitchen, which was toward the back end of the house. When I did, at first I didn't see anything. I got right up close to the window and peered out into the backyard. Everything seemed to be normal enough. It was pitch black out there, though, so I couldn't see most of it. I was wondering who this person could be and where they might have gone to. I was also glad I didn't see them back there. After looking out the window for about a minute or 2, I backed away and headed back into the family room, where I had been playing video games before. Around the time I made it back into the room, though, I started to hear a rattling sound from the back door. Somebody was clearly trying to open it. Instantly when I heard that, I sprinted up the stairs and ran all the way to my parents' bedroom. I woke them up and told them somebody was trying to get inside the house. My parents both came downstairs with me. When my dad turned on the light to the backyard, he could see the man running away. I didn't go over there, but I guess the man was by the house near the other back window and no longer at the back door. He ran out of the yard and through another neighbor's backyard before going out of sight. After the guy ran away, my parents stayed up for a bit, but the guy didn't come back. My dad went outside and found some tool marks on the back door. The man had been trying to get in. I went to bed a short time later, and the guy never returned for the rest of the time we lived there. No more strange things like that happened either. I still wonder who the hell the guy was and why he was trying to enter our house. For months, I was afraid somebody else would try to break in. Luckily, nobody did. The story I'm about to tell you is perhaps the strangest and most unsettling thing that's ever happened to me. Now that I've had some years to think about it, I understand just how weird it truly is. It was around 10 years ago, give or take a few. My wife and I loved to hike, and we still love to hike even to this day. Specifically, we love to do this in the fall season. We live in the northern east coast of the United States. The way the leaves turn, the weather changes, it's really remarkable. Not to mention, fall isn't too warm, so it makes the hiking much more bearable. We spend the first few weekends of the fall season hitting some local trails. As October approached, we started to venture further from home and hike on the more intense trails. Those were the types of hikes that take an entire day to complete. On one specific October afternoon, we decided to hike an unmarked trail. We were both experienced hikers, and we didn't plan on staying overnight or anything like that. My wife especially was very good at navigating the forest and just being cautious of her directions. That's why going off trail and taking an unmarked route didn't seem like that big a deal for us. Around midday, we decided to take a break in a nice little clearing. It was honestly hard to believe that people didn't travel to this section of the woods. It was almost like a little pocket of nature specifically designed for hikers to take breaks in. Just a circular little spot of forest with 2 tree stumps in it. We each sat on a stump and ate a protein bar. We decided to take a 15-minute break before heading back out into the forest. Right before heading back into the woods, we heard a noise coming from just beyond the trees. We both paused and listened to this rustling noise. In these specific woods, there were plenty of animals that could do some serious harm to us if we weren't careful. The more we kept listening to this noise, the more unsure we were of what animal it could be. There was clearly something out there making that noise and not just the wind. I said we should just stay put for a while until the noise stopped. My wife wanted to check out whatever was beyond the thick brush though. I can't say I blame her. I was very curious as well. I just didn't want to risk being mauled by a bear or something. We proceeded with caution, trying to be as light on our feet as we possibly could. Even writing this now, I still can't believe what we saw. Pacing rather erratically back and forth appeared to be a young woman, a very pretty young woman, most likely in her early to mid-20s. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and from what I could see, she was wearing this beautiful white dress that went down to her knees. The strangest part was that she seemed to be shoeless. Her feet were dirty, and the dirt was spreading up her legs and calves. I'm sure you're asking yourself why we didn't go and help this woman, who was clearly lost or in distress somehow. Well, to answer your question, we kind of did, or tried to at least. We didn't want to approach her because she was being very erratic with all her movements. Her hands were swaying all around. Her body was moving from left to right. She was mumbling and talking to herself. We couldn't make out exactly what she was saying. It was more like groans, mixed with occasional laughter. Instead of approaching this clearly unwell woman, we called out to her. At first, she didn't react at all. She started hopping around the woods erratically, almost like a frog. We shouted again, much louder this time. She must have heard us now, because she stopped in her tracks and didn't move at all. She just stood there. No more mumbling, no more movements. My wife took a step forward and asked the woman if she was all right, if she needed any help. Instead of answering, the woman turned around and hissed at my wife. I'm not kidding either. She straight up hissed like a cat, then turned around and sprinted into the woods in the opposite direction of where we were standing. I basically stayed put, but my wife chased her for a little while. She yelled at me that we shouldn't just let this poor girl stay in the woods all by herself. A few minutes into the chase, my wife just gave up, not because she didn't want to continue, but because the woman was so fast she was able to outrun my wife, even with no shoes on. I stayed in the area where we originally found the woman, and my wife ran back to where we started our hike. She called the rangers and informed them of what happened. She took the ranger to the spot where I was waiting, just in case the woman came back. The ranger gave us a nice verbal smackdown for hiking in areas we weren't supposed to, but where we were wasn't technically illegal, so we didn't get into real trouble. My wife was upset the ranger didn't seem to care about the woman we'd seen. We both had the impression the park ranger thought we were making up some sort of elaborate story. They started to search for the woman, but after a few days they never found anyone. They said they had never even found any evidence a person had been out there. They even checked our description of the woman with women who had recently gone missing, but she didn't seem to match any of those poor girls. We never received any answers about this weird occurrence in the woods. My wife even went back to those woods several times and tried searching for any sign of the woman. She never got any answers. We did at least take some solace in the fact that no woman matching that description was ever reported missing, or worse, found dead. I don't know exactly what we saw that day. I have no idea where that woman came from, or where she went. All I know for sure is that she was clearly not in the correct state of mind, and she was very, very fast. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.